In this video, what we're going to be doing is installing a set of gauges in place of our double DIN stereo in our Mustang track car. So we're going to retain a stereo and actually get more functionality. We're going to have a single DIN this time, but we'll have access to Bluetooth and all the modern things that you would need in a stereo. You could make calls with this. It's basically a totally new unit. But with all that extra space, we opted to get this custom 3D printed part right here, which will allow us to, instead of the tall, thick double DIN, install gauges. And the gauges we got are from Prosport. I've installed these before and I love them. I'm going to show you why that they're awesome for a track car specifically. And you get everything you need to install the gauges and the stereo. Now, a couple things that you might need extra for your application is a sandwich plate like this one. What this allows you to do is you remove your oil filter, you install this, and there's ports around the circumference of this sandwich plate that allow you to have taps for, like, say, oil pressure, oil temperature, whatever else you might want to add. You've got that. That's a really easy way to tap into your oil system. We will also have to tap in a coolant, which I will show you. But for that, I went ahead and got this from Autometer, part number 2268. This is going to allow us to thread into the side of our block, and it's got a nice little crush washer there. This will go in place of a stock plug and allow us a spot to hook up our coolant temp. But let me talk about these gauges. Let's unbox them and tell you why I picked these specifically, because these gauges are super trick. What I like about these gauges is you get both an analog and a digital, meaning you've got an actual sweeping and it's very fast acting pointer to see where your temp's at. But if you just want to look at a glance, everything comes out digital. So you get the best of both worlds. Some people don't like fully digital gauges, but it's nice to take a look and glance and see where things are at. You can program in alarms. So it'll do two things. You can set an alarm. So say this one right here is oil, right? Oil temperature. Maybe I want the alarm to come on at 260. Well, I can have a alarm set where it starts beeping at 260 and the colors will change. If you look right here, you can see it's blue and then it goes to red. So you can program it so at a glance, whether you want the sound or not, you can get an alarm to let you know, hey, something's different. I need to slow down, pull over, whatever. You don't get that in a lot of gauges, and these things are affordable. We can look up the price and I'll link it below so you can see, but these are way less expensive than some of the other gauges on the market, but they're chock full of features. All right, let's dive into the disassembly. Now, there's plenty of videos out there showing you how to remove a center console, and honestly, if you're doing this on a different car, this won't be totally apples to apples. But what I will say is definitely take your time. You don't want to break any of the clips. You want to be extra careful because a lot of times these cars are older, things can be brittle. So everything came apart pretty easily here, but I did find a little bit of a surprise, which I will show you here in a second. If you've worked on an old car before, tell you what, that looks familiar. And it's not OEM, unless the M for OEM stands for mice. There were mice inside the center console at some point in time. So when you open everything up, the kit comes with everything you need. You've got your wiring harness right here. You've got a bracket. You've even got a shield if you want to have it in a spot where you're going to hit with direct sunlight. This will make it so you don't have glare on your gauge. And then also they've got this, which is really cool. And you can pair these two together if you want to mount these freestanding. Now, we are going to use the bezel that I showed you just like this, and we'll have all three in there next to each other. But if you didn't want to do that and you want to mount it like on your dash, you have a race car or something like that, where you've got nothing like this, this would be perfect. And this comes as part of the kit. It does come with all the instructions and everything you would need. And they make it very easy to daisy chain the gauges together. So you basically only have to power one gauge, and then since ours are in a row, you can just run power to the next and everything is directly plug and play on the back of the gauge. Next thing I love to do is lay out the gauges. So in this case, I'm pulling all the gauges out and I'm just gonna set it into that 3D printed bezel that I purchased and try to get everything aligned and the gauges in the right orientation and order that I want to see in the dash. If you weren't completely sure about what I meant by daisy chaining, here's what it is. So basically, looking at the back of this gauge, on the right-hand side, you've got your 4 wiring connections. So you have a constant 12 volt, a ground, an accessory 12 volt, and a switch for dimming. You can hook up the dimming if you'd like. We will probably do it, and I'm gonna show you a trick way to do this if you're doing a stereo. The really nice thing is, all of these wires that will hook up to our stock connector and will hook into here, we can come right off of here and power our gauges, so we're not searching for wires underneath the dash. It's one of the reasons I really like doing a stereo and gauge combination like this, because it makes wiring super simple. We can do this inside on the table super easily, and everything is going to be very plug and play. So on the back of each gauge, you've got power, your input on the right. So if you're just doing one gauge, all you would need is this and this. Everything is plug and play. The center is for, we come down here, the center is for your sensors. So this plugs in, it goes to the sensors, wherever you're routing to that on the vehicle. And the left-hand side is for daisy chaining, meaning if I power one of them, I can just route this to the next gauge, to the next gauge next to it, and it's all easily plug and play. You just wire one and it will power all three. Okay, I call this my little trick. It's really not, but here's what I like to do. I really like installing gauges with a stereo, because when you get an aftermarket stereo, it comes with a pigtailed harness that you have to tie into your factory system. In a lot of cases, like if you order from Crutchfield, they'll give you the correct connector for your car, and all the instructions are super clear. So since you're already making 2 connections, then why not make a few more and just add, like we'll call it a Y, to go to the connections that you need. You need them for your stereo anyway, but they also need to go to your gauges. For example, those are like your ground, your constant 12 volt, your switch 12 volt, and any kind of illumination or dimming features. You're already doing them, so might as well just add them for the gauges. This is what it looks like when you're done. I think it's super clean. There you can see the stereo and also the harness for the gauges, and there it is with some tape on it. You just plug this in. Normally, obviously, this would go to your stereo, and it still will. But because all the same power connections, and it's all low voltage, is needed for your gauges, now you've got a really nice connection that ties everything together. You got plenty of length now. I really like doing it this way. You could do it without the electrical tape. Don't go too crazy on the electrical tape. I just do this to kind of keep everything together. But if you put too much electrical tape on it, it'll make it hard to bend. And because you've added a lot of length to the wiring harness, sometimes that can be a problem. So just keep that in mind. You got to get everything to tuck back in here, obviously. But the good news is, with the double DIN gone and the gauges, there should be more space, you know, behind the stereo. Okay, hopping underneath the car, I would recommend doing an oil change at the same time you're doing this. You know, you could probably try and leave the oil in the pan, but I just don't think that's the best idea. So we already drained the oil. We're gonna remove the filter because, and I'll show you once this drains out, but if you ever wanted a trick, you know, for not spilling oil everywhere on a 3-valve, just use some cardboard. Anyways, we'll get this filter off and then I'll show you where the sandwich plate's gonna go. I'd go over there further, but I'm afraid I'm gonna drop my phone, or my camera, I should say, in the oil. So we're not gonna do that. So here is the sandwich plate that I'm talking about. Notice there's an O-ring on one side and not on the other. The way this gets installed is the O-ring side goes up underneath the car. So this basically goes like this. Let's pretend the car's the table. This nut gets threaded in and tightened down. Now that's clamped in place. And now you can take an oil filter and thread it on there. When you do that, you have created this little sandwich action, and around the circumference of this are ports. So if you want, let's say, oil pressure and temperature, you could hook them to any of these ports. You cap the other ones. This gives you spares in case you ever wanted to add in the future. Like with all the sensors installed, plenty of room. Now we're gonna use some Loctite on this part, the Loctite on the female, because that's what goes up in there. And then we'll torque this down. I think I'm gonna go with about 25 foot-pounds, not a ton. And this will be a good strong reminder not to over torque my oil filter, because if you put this on too loose and your oil filter too hard, you could potentially, you know, spin one off when you meant to just undo the other one. And that Loctite 243, I think, has a 24-hour cure time. So rather than go and get excited and put the oil filter on there, we're gonna wait, let it do its thing. I'm gonna show you where we're gonna tie in for our temperature. Now, my thoughts for this are, one, this is in the block, it's towards the back of the block. This is a true, in my opinion, hot temperature, okay? The other thing is we're not cutting hoses, we're not doing anything super janky. If we ever wanna pull this out, you know, like meaning our temp sender, and reinstall this plug, we can. So this is on the driver's side, and you're gonna need an extra part for this. Let me show you the tools you need to remove this because it's in there pretty good. An 8mm. We've got an extension. You may not need one that long, but this is a long breaker bar, and I needed that leverage to break it loose. I was thinking about using some heat on the little plug, but basically this worked. A little stubby ratchet though is not gonna cut it. Number from Autometer is the right adapter. It's got a crush washer and everything if you want to install a temp sensor in the side of your block. And I really hope that that is the case, because we're gonna attempt to do this without draining the coolant. And that might be a terrible idea, but at least it'll probably be funny. In terms of the best and worst ideas I've ever had, it wasn't my worst. Another pro tip, when you're doing this, each box is labeled. So like you've got oil pressure, in my case, oil pressure, water temp, oil temp. But your oil and your water are gonna be the same style connection. So make sure you mark yours up. It's nice that Prosport does this, like the oil temp one is a black connector, the oil pressure is a black connector. The other temp ones are blue. So since I have two types of temperature, I marked it gold. And I came over here to set myself straight so I remember, well, I didn't write it down, but gold is for oil temp. Okay, here's my trick for getting wires through the firewall in these cars. Man, if I get the light to work, we'd really be in business. Come on, sweetie. Okay, so my trick for getting the wire through the firewall is there's this big connector. If you remove this flash panel, there's literally an extra slot. You just gotta poke it out, but it's already like kind of cut in the grommet, and you can fish your wires through this way. Everything gets tucked up out of the way, and then when hopefully we've got enough room on the inside, I think it's gonna work. We're gonna try this. Painfully fished all the wires through, and really how painful that is just depends on where you fish them, but I wanted mine out of the way. I've got one wire here that's a little bit shorter, which is kind of a bummer because I don't have a lot of room to play with. But basically, make sure that all your color-coded gauge wires get plugged in correctly. Then you've got your power that just needs to go to one of the gauges since they're daisy chained together. Obviously our stereo, don't forget your antenna. And that's about it. I don't think this plug gets used. That was for the old stereo. It's not really meant to be a stereo install video, but it looks cool enough I gotta show you. I had to drill these out. I'll link this little bezel because I know you guys will ask in the description below. But this is what it looks like with the gauges right beneath the stereo. I think it looks super cool. Before I button everything up, I ran it through the frame. Everything ties up out of the way, comes up here, goes in through an existing grommet, and up underneath the dash. Can't see any wires, comes in the side. And I'll fire it up for everybody so you can see it, but that's what it looks like. All reinstalled. I've also got a working e-brake now, which is great. Heck yeah. We were able to test out the gauges on the track. I'm gonna have a whole video on that shortly, the first drift session in the Mustang. But real quick, we'll show you a quick teaser of what that looked like. One of the awesome features that came in handy straight away was that alarm. So I went out on the track, I configured all my alarms for the gauges before going, went out, did a session, my wife did, back and forth, and then eventually the coolant temp light came on, which was awesome. So my wife pulled back in, let me know, I said, okay, just drive around the pits a little bit, cool it off, and we were great. So an awesome feature that helped first time out on the track, it just keeps your car safe. Highly recommend this gauges. Hopefully this video was helpful. See you next time on Truck and Roll.